In this lesson, we're going to talk about one of the most critical aspects of cybersecurity, the data security lifecycle. Data is often called the lifeblood of modern organizations, and protecting that data requires more than just setting up a firewall or installing antivirus software. Data goes through multiple stages throughout its existence, and each stage presents unique security challenges and requires specific protection measures. Think about a simple piece of customer information, like an email address. From the moment it's collected on your website, through storage in your database, use in marketing campaigns, sharing with partners, archiving for compliance, and eventually deletion. That single piece of data passes through multiple systems, locations, and hands. At every single point in this journey, it needs protection. By the end of this lesson, you will have been introduced to the complete data security lifecycle, recognizing the security requirements at each stage, and be able to understand appropriate controls throughout the entire data lifecycle. This holistic view is essential because a breach at any stage can compromise your entire data security posture. First, let's talk more about what is the data security lifecycle. The data security lifecycle is a framework that describes the complete journey of data from its initial creation or acquisition through to its final destruction. It's a conceptual model that helps security professionals think systematically about data protection. Data doesn't exist in a static state. It's constantly moving, changing, being accessed, and transformed. Without a life cycle approach, organizations tend to focus on one or two stages, typically storage, while neglecting other critical phases where data might be equally or more vulnerable. There are different models of the data security lifecycle, but the most comprehensive framework includes 7 distinct stages: creation, storage, use, sharing, archiving, destruction, and disposal. Some models combine or separate these differently, but understanding all 7 stages gives you the most complete picture. Security controls appropriate for one stage might be insufficient for another. Data at rest requires different protections than data in transit or data in use. Likewise, the sensitivity of data, regulatory requirements, and business needs all influence what controls are necessary at each stage. The life cycle is also cyclical in nature. While data moves through these stages generally in order, it can loop back. Archived data might be retrieved and used again. Shared data creates copies that have their own life cycle. Understanding these patterns helps you anticipate where vulnerabilities might emerge. Let's start at the beginning, the creation or collection stage. This is when data first enters your organization's control. It might be created internally, such as when an employee drafts a document or a system generates log files, or it might be collected from external sources, like customer information submitted through a web form or data purchased from a third-party provider. Security considerations at this stage are foundational because mistakes made here can create vulnerabilities that persist throughout the entire life cycle. The principle of data minimization is critical. Only collect the data you actually need. Every piece of unnecessary data you collect expands your attack surface and increases your compliance burden. If you don't need a customer's date of birth, don't ask for it. Classification should happen at creation. Is this data public, internal, confidential, or highly sensitive? Proper classification drives all subsequent security decisions. Many organizations fail here by treating all data the same or by classifying data inconsistently. Input validation is another crucial control at this stage. If you're collecting data through web forms, APIs, or other input mechanisms, you need to validate that the data is properly formatted and doesn't contain malicious content. This prevents injection attacks and ensures data quality. You should also implement authentication and authorization controls at creation. Who is allowed to create or collect this type of data? For example, only HR personnel should be able to create employee records containing sensitive personal information in many cases. Finally, create an audit trail from the very beginning. Log when data was created or collected, by whom, and under what circumstances. This accountability becomes invaluable for compliance, incident investigation, and understanding your data flows. Once data is created or collected, it needs to be stored. And this is often where organizations focus most of their security effort. Storage security is critical, but remember, it's just one stage in the life cycle. The primary concern during storage is protecting data at rest. This means implementing encryption for sensitive data. If an attacker gains access to your storage systems, encrypted data is significantly more difficult to exploit than plain text data. The question isn't whether to encrypt, but rather what data requires encryption and what key management approach you'll use. Access controls are fundamental at this stage. Implement the principle of least privilege. Users and systems should only have access to the specific data they need to perform their functions. Role-based access control or attribute-based access control systems help enforce this principle at scale. Physical security matters for storage, especially if you maintain on-premise infrastructure. Your data center or server room should have appropriate physical access controls, environmental controls, and monitoring. For cloud storage, you're relying on your provider's physical security, but you're still responsible for logical access controls and encryption. Backup and redundancy are essential considerations during storage. Data should be backed up regularly, and backups should be stored separately from primary systems. However, remember that backups expand your attack surface. They're often targeted by ransomware attackers and need the same level of protection as primary data. Storage systems should be monitored for unusual access patterns or potential breaches. Security information and event management systems can help detect anomalies like users accessing unusually large amounts of data or accessing data they don't typically use. Finally, consider data residency and sovereignty requirements. Some regulations require certain types of data to be stored in specific geographic locations. Your storage architecture needs to accommodate these requirements. The use stage is when data is actively being accessed, processed, or modified. This is often the most dynamic and complex stage because data is in motion and being actively manipulated. Data in use is frequently the most vulnerable because it's often in an unencrypted or decrypted state. Obviously, people aren't looking at encrypted data for regular use. When an application needs to process data, it typically needs to decrypt it first. This creates a window of vulnerability where data could potentially be intercepted or exposed. Access controls remain critical during use, but they need to be more granular. It's not enough to control who can access a database. You need to control what they can do with the data they access. Can they view it but not modify it? Can they export it? Can they share it with others? Application security becomes paramount at this stage. The applications that process your data need to be developed securely with proper input validation, output encoding, and protection against common vulnerabilities like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. Secure coding practices and regular security testing of applications are essential. Monitoring and logging are particularly important during the use stage. You should log who accessed what data, when, and what they did with it. This creates an audit trail and helps detect insider threats or compromised accounts. Data masking and tokenization can provide additional protection during use. For example, customer service representatives might only need to see the last four digits of a credit card number, not the entire number. By masking sensitive portions of data, you reduce the risk of exposure even if the application or user account is compromised. Session security is another consideration. If users are accessing data through web applications or remote sessions, those sessions need to be encrypted, authenticated, and properly terminated when complete. Session hijacking is a common attack vector during the use stage. Finally, consider data loss prevention technologies that can monitor and prevent unauthorized data exfiltration during use. These systems can detect when users are attempting to copy sensitive data to USB drives, email it to personal accounts, or upload it to unauthorized cloud services. Data sharing is when information is transmitted or made accessible to other parties, whether internal or external. This stage is increasingly important as organizations collaborate more with partners, vendors, and customers. The fundamental challenge of sharing is that once data leaves your direct control, your ability to protect it diminishes significantly. This is why data sharing requires particularly careful consideration and robust controls. Encryption is essential for data in transit, whether you're sharing data via email, file transfer, APR, or any other mechanism. The transmission should be encrypted using protocols like TLS or VPN. Never send sensitive data in plain text over networks, especially public networks. Authentication and authorization matter tremendously during sharing. You need to verify the identity of the recipient and confirm they're authorized to receive the specific data being shared. This might involve multi factor authentication, digital certificate, or API keys. Data sharing agreement or contracts should be in place before sharing sensitive data with external parties. These agreements should specify how the recipient can use the data, how they must protect it, how long they can retain it, and what they must do when they no longer need it. Consider implementing data rights management or information rights management technologies. These systems allow you to maintain some control over data even after it's been shared by enforcing restrictions like preventing copying, printing, or forwarding. Minimize what you share. Apply the principle of least privilege to data sharing. Only share the minimum amount of data necessary for the recipient's purpose. If a partner only needs aggregate statistics, don't share individual records. Track what data you've shared, with whom, and when. Maintain an inventory of data sharing arrangements so you know where copies of your sensitive data exist outside your organization. This becomes critical if you discover a breach or need to respond to data subject access requests under privacy regulations. Finally, secure the sharing mechanisms themselves. File sharing platforms, collaboration tools, and communication channels all need to be properly configured and secured. Default settings are often insufficient for sensitive data sharing. Archiving is the process of moving data that's no longer actively used into long-term storage. Organizations archive data for various reasons: regulatory compliance, legal requirements, historical reference, or business continuity. The primary security consideration for archived data is maintaining its confidentiality, integrity, and availability over extended periods, potentially years or decades. This presents unique challenges because technology changes, encryption algorithms evolve, and storage media degrades. Archived data should be encrypted, and you need a long-term key management strategy. If you archive data for 10 years but lose the encryption keys after 5, the data becomes inaccessible even to authorized users. Access to archived data should be even more restricted than active data because it's rarely needed. Principle of least privilege there. Implement strong access controls and monitor any access to archives carefully. Is there a reason someone should be getting in there? Unusual access to archived data can indicate insider threats or compromised accounts. Maintain the integrity of archived data through checksums, digital signatures, or other integrity verification mechanisms. You need to be able to prove that archived data hasn't been tampered with, especially if it might be needed for legal or compliance purposes. Consider the format and readability of archived data. Technology evolves and file formats become obsolete. Your archiving strategy should include plans for format migration to ensure data remains accessible as technology changes. Archive storage should be separate from production systems, both logically and physically. This protects archived data from production system breaches and ensures that compromising one doesn't automatically compromise the other. Finally, document your archiving policies clearly. How long is data retained in archives? Under what circumstances can it be retrieved? Who can authorize retrieval? Clear policies prevent confusion and support compliance requirements. Stage 6 is destruction. Data destruction is the process of permanently deleting data when it's no longer needed. This stage is often neglected, but it's critical for both security and compliance. Data you no longer have cannot be stolen or misused. The fundamental principle is that data should not be retained longer than necessary. Every piece of unnecessary data represents liability and expands your attack surface. However, you must balance this with legal, regulatory, and business requirements for retention. Implement clear data retention policies that specify how long different types of data must be kept and when they should be destroyed. These policies should be based on legal requirements, regulatory mandates, and business needs. Secure deletion is more complex than most people realize. Simply deleting files or emptying the recycle bin doesn't actually remove data from storage media. The data remains recoverable until it's overwritten. For sensitive data, you need to use secure deletion methods that overwrite the data multiple times or use cryptographic erasure techniques. For databases, deletion must be thorough. It's not enough to delete records from production databases if they still exist in backups, logs, or development copies. Comprehensive destruction requires identifying and removing data from all locations. Destruction should be logged and documented. Maintain records of what data was destroyed, when, by whom, and using what method. This documentation is important for compliance audits and demonstrating that you're following your own retention policies. Consider the timing of destruction carefully. Some data should be destroyed immediately after it's no longer needed, while other data might need to be retained for specific periods. Automated destruction processes can help ensure consistency and reduce the risk of human error. Finally, destruction should be irreversible. Once data is properly destroyed, it should be impossible to recover it. This finality is what makes destruction a critical security control. And stage 7, disposal. The disposal stage specifically addresses the physical destruction of hardware or media that contain data. This is distinct from data destruction because even after data is logically deleted, it may still exist on physical media. When you decommission servers, replace hard drives, dispose of old computers, or discard backup tapes, you need to ensure that no data can be recovered from these physical items. Data remnants, the residual physical representation of data that has been deleted, is a real concern. For magnetic media like hard drives, secure disposal methods include degaussing, which uses a powerful magnetic field to disrupt the magnetic domains on the drive, or physical destruction, such as shredding or crushing. Simply formatting a drive is insufficient for sensitive data. For solid state drives and flash media, disposal is more challenging because these devices distribute data across the physical media in ways that make simple overwriting less effective. Cryptographic erasure, where the encryption keys are destroyed, can be effective if the device was encrypted. Otherwise, physical destruction is the most reliable method. Disposal should follow a chain of custody process, especially for highly sensitive systems. You should be able to track devices from the moment they're identified for disposal through their final destruction, with documentation at each step. Consider whether to handle disposal in-house or use a certified disposal vendor. Certified vendors can provide certificates of destruction and may have specialized equipment for secure disposal. However, you remain responsible for ensuring disposal is completed properly, so vendor management and auditing are essential. Remember that disposal applies to all forms of media: hard drives, USB drives, backup tapes, optical media, and even paper documents containing sensitive information. Each requires appropriate disposal methods. Finally, don't forget about mobile devices, copiers with hard drives, and other equipment that might contain data but isn't obviously a data storage device. Modern copiers, printers, and multifunction devices often have internal storage that retains copies of documents. Lifecycle integration and continuous protection. Now that we've examined each stage individually, let's discuss how they work together and how to implement lifecycle-based security in practice. The data security lifecycle isn't a series of isolated stages, but rather a continuous flow. Security controls need to be integrated across all stages, and you need visibility into data as it moves through the lifecycle. This is where data governance programs become essential. Start by implementing data classification and tagging systems that persist throughout the lifecycle. When data is classified as confidential at creation, that classification should follow the data through storage, use, sharing, archiving, and ultimately inform retention and destruction decisions. Data mapping is crucial for understanding how data flows through your organization. You need to know where data is created, where it's stored, which applications use it, who it's shared with, and where copies exist. This mapping supports both security and compliance efforts. Automate lifecycle management wherever possible. Manual processes are error prone and they do not scale. Automated systems can enforce retention policies, trigger destruction when retention periods expire, and ensure that consistent application of the security controls that you need. So, when it's possible, you want that automated. Implement continuous monitoring across the lifecycle. Security information and event management systems, data loss prevention tools, DLP tools, and database activity monitoring should all work together to provide visibility into how data is being accessed and used throughout its lifecycle. Regular audits should examine the entire lifecycle, not just individual stages. Are creation controls working properly? Is access to stored data appropriately restricted? Are destruction policies being followed? Comprehensive audits reveal gaps that might not be visible when examining stages in isolation. Privacy regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and others have made lifecycle management more important than ever. These regulations include requirements that map directly to lifecycle stages. Purpose limitation relates to creation and use. Data minimization relates to creation and storage. And the right to erasure relates to destruction. Finally, recognize that different types of data may require different lifecycle approaches. Highly sensitive data, like health records, or financial information requires stricter controls at every stage than less sensitive data, like public marketing materials. Your lifecycle management should be risk-based and proportionate to the sensitivity of the data. Let's address some common challenges organizations face when implementing lifecycle-based data security and discuss best practices for overcoming them. One of the biggest challenges is simply knowing what data you have and where it is. Many organizations have accumulated data over years without proper inventory or organization. They just have a ton of junk because it has no meaning to them because they don't know what it is. They don't know where the things they need are. It's like a hoarder, a digital hoarder. Many companies are digital hoarders. So this is shadow data, and this shadow data creates security and compliance risks. The solution is to conduct comprehensive data discovery and inventory exercises, then maintain that inventory ongoing. So you're going to fix it and then make sure that you have a process in place to continuously prevent it from becoming a bad shadow data hoarding situation again. Another challenge is balancing security with usability. Overly restrictive controls can impede business operations and lead users to find workarounds that actually reduce security. The key is to involve stakeholders from business units when designing controls, focusing on controls that are both effective and practical. Legacy systems often don't support modern security controls for all lifecycle stages. You might have applications that can't easily encrypt data or storage systems that don't support granular access controls. Address this through compensating controls, such as network segmentation or additional monitoring, while working towards system modernization. Data sprawl is a persistent problem. As organizations adopt more cloud services, collaboration tools, and mobile applications, data gets distributed across numerous platforms and locations. This makes lifecycle management more complex. A strong data governance program with clear policies about where data can be stored and how it can be shared is essential. Lack of executive support often undermines data security lifecycle initiatives. That's with everything in your organization. If you don't have that executive support, you're on shaky ground. These programs require investment in technology, processes, and training. Build a business case that demonstrates the risk of not protecting data throughout its lifecycle, including regulatory fines, breach costs, and reputational damage. Best practices for success include starting with your most sensitive data and implementing lifecycle controls for it first. That's what's most important. Then you expand that to less sensitive data over time. This is a risk-based approach, and it will deliver the most security value quickly. Invest in training and awareness so everyone in the organization understands their role in protecting data throughout its lifecycle. Developers need to understand secure creation and use. IT staff need to understand storage and destruction. And all employees need to understand their responsibilities for the data they handle. Document your processes and policies clearly and make them accessible. That's a very important part. A lot of people might be Wild West seeming sorts, but the moment you tell them that there are processes and policies they can follow and you make sure they know where they are, they start following them. A lot of people will just do whatever until they know what the rules are, and then they will follow them perfectly. It's a real thing that a lot of people don't realize. People cannot follow life cycle security requirements if they don't know what those requirements are. And what you get is frustration and a mess. So let's just summarize the essential concepts from this lesson on the data security lifecycle. The data security lifecycle provides a framework for thinking systematically about data protection from creation through destruction. Understanding this lifecycle is essential because data faces different threats and requires different controls at each stage. I mentioned near the beginning of this lesson that various data security lifecycle models have different stages and such. But in this lesson, we're talking about a model of 7 stages: creation, storage, use, sharing, archiving, destruction, and disposal. And each of these have unique security considerations. Effective data protection requires appropriate controls at every stage, not just focusing on 1 or 2 stages like storage. Key principles that apply throughout the life cycle include data minimization, collect and retain only what you need. Data classification, understand the sensitivity of your data and protect it accordingly. Least privilege, provide access only to those who need it. Encryption, protect data at rest, in transit, and increasingly in use. Monitoring and logging, maintain visibility into how data is accessed and used. And lifecycle automation, use technology to enforce policies consistently. You might have all the best plans in the world, and you might put in your calendar and put reminders up that to do specific things at a specific time. But number one, it's not a valid use of your time if it can be automated. Number two, things can get in the way. You can get sick, schedules can change, priorities can change. Do it once where you can and use technology to enforce the policies. So the retention and various pieces, they automatically take that data through the process and the life cycle in the way that it needs to go for best practice security management. Regulatory compliance increasingly requires lifecycle based approaches to data protection. Privacy regulations worldwide mandate specific practices that map to lifecycle stages, and demonstrating compliance requires showing that you protect data throughout its complete lifecycle. So it's not enough to do it, you need to be able to prove that you've done it. Remember, the life cycle is continuous and interconnected. Weaknesses at any stage can compromise your entire data security posture. Everybody's heard that term, the weakest link. Who is the weakest link? What stage is the weakest link? So a holistic approach is absolutely essential. The life cycle also applies to all types of data, not just obviously sensitive information like financial records or health data. Even though we said start with that, that's getting going, but you don't stop with that. Even seemingly innocuous data can create security or privacy risks if not properly managed throughout its life cycle. There are a lot of particularly sneaky people, and if they can gather a lot of different pieces of information that people might say, well, that's not important. Who cares about that? What they're not thinking about is the web that these folks are building. They're taking a lot of different pieces, and by accumulating all these various pieces, they can predict and create big pictures. They can get information different from what these actual pieces are when they accumulate all these pieces and put them together. And that is very common. It's not just 2 smart people in the world who know how to do that or have thought of that. It's well-known practice. Now, in your own practice, start by mapping your data flows and understanding how data moves through the life cycle in your organization. Identify gaps where security controls are weak or missing. Prioritize based on risk, focusing first on your most sensitive data and most vulnerable stages. Implementing comprehensive data security lifecycle management is a journey, not a destination. Unfortunately, your job is never over. Technology changes, threats evolve, and your data landscape shifts. Continuous improvement and adaptation are necessary. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you in the next lesson.